Welcome back. I've got Matt Marcotte on the line. Matt, how are you?
Good, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well and really looking forward to this conversation. As we kind
Me
of
too.
hinted in the pre-show. We're kind of singing out of the same hymn book in a way, but this is going to be good because I always like getting perspectives from different people that are working in the space and some insights, and I always learn from these things. So that's why I love doing them. So why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure, sure. Just very quickly, spent the first 34 years of my career at the kind of intersection of consumer and retail. And so I essentially helped to build and lead and turn around different brands. So some that you might know, Gap, Apple, Tory Burch, Bergdorf Goodman. And then my last gig was at Salesforce on the tech side. And then I really was just consumed by this passion I have for leadership and for how we actually lead brands, how we build brands, and how we actually create transformational experiences for both employees and customers. And so I kind of made the decision to start my own practice. And then the book kind of followed that. So the book is really a culmination of the 34 years I spent leading teams.
Yeah, so when people ask you how long did it take you to write the book, 34 years. Yeah, and which, if not
Yeah, it's
longer, and
true.
it is, and we'll definitely dive into the book in a moment. But yeah, those experiences and obviously the well-known brands that you got to play with, I'm sure there was some interesting dynamics with each of them, but probably a lot of commonalities as well. And I think I see that in the clients that I work with. It's like we're different. Yeah, I know everybody's different, just
Yes.
like everybody else, but there are some nuances to it,
Yeah.
whether it's from, and it's always usually driven by the leadership, where we know,
Yes.
Apple's leadership history is well documented and well known, and from the great times to the down times to the, let's redo this, and then, okay,
Yeah.
well, $1 trillion organization, they're doing okay. But again, there's organizations that would be similar that never quite get it right and they struggle. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe some insights as you think why some organizations are better than others in honing what their brand and the storytelling that they're trying to portray.
Yeah, no, I think a couple of things. First, I'm a big believer that while many organizations call themselves brands, there are not as many brands as people would like to think they are. And what I mean by that is to be a brand, you have to be very clear about who you are, but also who you aren't. And I think for the companies and brands that do well, they keep that clarity around their North Star, their kind of who they are, their purpose, why they exist in the world. And they do a really great job of expressing that across every single part of the organization. I think the companies that don't do it as well, they substitute things like short-term objectives or financial goals in place of mission, vision, and purpose. And so it becomes very short-term driven versus long-term driven.
Yeah, sometimes they get so wrapped up in, who they are, who they think they are, that, that poster on the wall with the mission, vision, and values is just a poster on the wall. They're not
Correct.
living it. They're not,
Yeah.
they're not looking at it and having it a living, breathing document. And I remember I was working for a healthcare organization many years ago, and we were in a board meeting, and they were struggling a bit as a board. And what I mean by that is they were getting pulled in too many different directions. They're listening to the community, which is not a bad thing. It's probably good to listen to your peers, but they want to take the organization in so many different places. So
Mhm.
I finally said, well, what, let's remind ourselves, what's the mission, vision, and values. And I kind of went around the room, and everybody looked like they weren't not ready for that pop quiz. And they're like, and I said, look behind me to my right. What does that poster say? It says mission, vision, and
Yeah,
values. You could just read it. There it is. But obviously, if it's not in your heart, then
correct.
it's just something that you had ChatGPT put together. You didn't read it. You just hung it up on a wall, and there it is. And you didn't really do anything with it. So it's
Yeah.
important for organizations to, before they throw it up on a wall, figure out what it is. Why are we here? Who are we? Who do we serve? And
Yes.
yeah, this is one area, and you and I both know this. Uh, there are many organizations that say, well, we serve our clients and things like that, but they forget to serve the people that work with them. Um,
Exactly.
and that causes all kinds of problems, which we see. We're seeing it right now with workplace culture, lack of engagement. You know, we had the Great Resignation. We had just it's been a mess to say the least.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and I know that's a lot of work that you're working on too to kind of help
Correct.
people figure that out. So why don't you
Yeah.
dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, especially in the last part, which is you can't leapfrog over your internal customer to get to your external customer. And I think that is, unfortunately, I mean, I'll use my own experience. The reality is the largest kind of variable cost center you have is your human capital. And so I think when companies approach the conversation with that filter, when times are challenging, they look for quick ways to right the ship. And that usually means adjusting somehow that human capital budget. So if you see people as a means to an end or just kind of a line item on a spreadsheet, then you treat them as such. It becomes more transactional. But if you really do see that the fuel, the real fuel to your ability to drive success, both repeatable, scalable, profitable, is actually the people that work with you, then you treat them differently. And I think that that shift in how you see people internally, specifically, we were talking about, is really the key to success. And so, you talked about earlier, we both talked about this idea of kind of poster on a wall. And if you know who you are and why you exist in the world, and you build a culture, let's just say that you say people are our secret sauce, then when it comes time to have to make tough decisions, you filter those decisions through your beliefs. And so if you say like our people are the most important thing, well, then hopefully they're the last thing that gets cut. But if you actually say, actually, the return to shareholders is the most important thing. And of course, we're not in, we're for profit. Most companies are for profit. I get that. But if that's really the kind of highest order that you follow, then you do anything you have to have value extraction to be able to actually deliver that number. And so it comes down to, for me, what you believe, what you prioritize, what you see as important to fuel your business. And that's where I think the work that I'm doing with leaders is to help them really get clear on the things that really drive results.
You take care of your people, you're going to take care of your shareholders. More,
100%.
more
And what's
so.
interesting, and I'm sure you see this too, it's like that phrase or the things we're talking about, it's so basic. It's so intuitive in so many ways, yet it still serves as one of the biggest barriers to success. And so I think that to me is kind of I've always considered myself a consumer anthropologist. I'm fascinated by why people behave the way they do. And it still fascinates me why executives can say all the things we're talking about, but when push comes to shove, they still make different decisions. And so that's some of the work that I do is try to uncover the motivations and the real beliefs that people have and what holds them back from really doing the bold, to quote unquote, the bold thing, which is to invest in your internal customer.
Yeah, and we all know that the retention cost and having to replace people
Sure.
is huge. And for the longest time, people ignore it because it doesn't necessarily show up on the P&L. I mean,
Mm,
it can, but it doesn't.
yeah.
And where we're starting to see some impact, although not as huge, is in the insurance benefits claims. Mental health claims have gone through the roof as we've added more and more
Yeah.
mental health opportunities and insurance coverage. Well, the claims, and I know people in industry and they say, oh yeah, it's like the claims are going up, 30, 40, 50% a year. And used to it was like, okay, people are having surgeries or lots of, their kids are at an age where they're using the dentist too much, whatever, all those things. But it's like, no, we're seeing it on the mental health side of things. And that is definitely impacting the bottom line a bit. But yet, it's not a big enough pain point for a lot of organizations to recognize, okay, why are our people using the mental health side of things so much?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's interesting that you say that. I actually teach an MBA class, and last night we were talking about organizational alignment. as, kind of part of how you drive brand and consumer relationships. And I asked my class, and these are people who are in their mid 20s, let's just say, but most of them work full time. And we were talking about this lack of alignment, and it was every single one of them had a story, either currently or previously, of lack of leadership alignment, of whether allowing bad performance to last too long, or not actually holding themselves accountable, or not actually leading their teams, but rather managing tasks. And you see, to your point, the actual kind of negative reaction and kind of the toxic culture that gets created because people essentially then check out, right? So whether they check out internally, where they stay and they check out, or they leave, right? Either way, you've got this kind of non-optimal environment. And so, one of the things that I talk a ton about in the book, and I've talked about my whole career, is the idea of building a culture that actually is one that creates commitment versus compliance. And culture is not a soft skill, it's a strategic advantage. And it's what wraps everything you do. And so I think, where, to your point, where people say it doesn't show up in a P&L, it shows up on a P&L in your results. It's an investment in driving those results, but it's not a straight line between A and B. And I think that is, building the case for these types of investments, or for the, as you said, not taking it just the poster on the wall, but embedding it in every single thing that you do, is the work that's hard. It's really hard, but it's upfront work that has huge dividends in the back end.
It's basically laying the foundation. If you have a strong foundation in your building or your house, it can withstand storms. And we know over the last 5+ years, there's been a couple storms at least that we've had to deal with in a global fashion, and obviously in North America as well, but definitely globally. So yeah, let's segue to the book. And I know it took you 34+ years to write it, but
Very slow.
yeah, that's okay. One word at a time. And you halfway through, you decide, I don't like this font, and you go, and then you change the font, and of
Yeah.
course your word processor. I'm dating myself there.
Yeah. I'm with you though. I'm tracking.
Yeah, word perfect, man. I miss those macros. But anyway, um, I should have learned them in Word too, but whatever. But yeah, you just you write, and life experiences and all build that up. But
Yeah.
yeah, I ask this question to pretty much every author I interview: is what in the world wanted or motivated you to spend so much time of your life to write a book? Because it is a time-consuming adventure. I mean,
Yeah.
years, 30 something years, but it's one of those things where you're like, okay, I literally have to carve out time from my life to do just this. And
Yeah.
it's not an easy adventure, and such a small percentage of the global population actually do it. So I always ask authors, what was the motivation for you to write the book?
Yeah. So I have been incredibly blessed in the career that I've had and the companies and brands that I've worked for. Now, part of that is the incredible leaders I've worked for and seeing amazing things, but also in times when it was really not great, and seeing decisions that were made that created kind of not ideal conditions. But point is, I've seen a lot of things. And I have such passion around this idea of how you build cultures of commitment versus compliance that drive results. So I have luckily been in positions where we've built exponential results. We've driven huge growth across multiple different kinds of brands and companies. And so it's always in service of what we're trying to accomplish, but it's how we get there. And it's interesting, when I first started writing the book, I was talking about some of the frameworks that are in the book. And as I started thinking about why this framework versus somebody else's framework, what I realized was it wasn't about the framework. It was the fact that I was lucky enough to work with people who believed in the same mission that I believed in. And so when you have alignment of belief and you're able to translate belief into a culture that really brings everyone together and allows them to be part of the solution and the creation of the strategy, but also kind of you build something bigger than the sum of the parts, right? I felt like that was actually the story, and I felt like that was a missing narrative in the world today, which is, how do you create these cultures that actually drive results? And what do you have to think about? And the very first question I ask in the book is, when is the last time you asked your brand what it believes? And it's amazing in conversations that I've had. It's like you talking about the board. When you ask them that question, they didn't know how to answer it because it wasn't in their hearts and souls. Like it was literally something they could recite, but clearly something they weren't living. And so those are the types of conversations that I've had over decades in driving and building businesses. And I just felt like I wanted to share it because I feel like there's an opportunity to really invest more so than ever in the people who make it all happen, which are the employees that work for brands. And how do you take care of them so that they halo that out to the external customer?
Yeah, that's great points there. And a couple areas in the book that jumped out at me. I mean, there was a ton, but a couple that really, I was doing a lot of head nodding, kind of like my puppy does. Yep, yeah, I want that. Give me that. The first one is, leaders, and I see this all the time. You do too. Is they lead with their head, but not their heart,
Yeah.
and that I find, and personally experience, when I was leading organizations, I had to remind myself. It's like let's talk to the heart a bit here and see what it's feeling. Because the head's saying this, what's my heart saying on this?
Mhm.
And if it was dramatically different, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna lean on my heart on this one more often than not. And when I did, it worked out more often than not that that was the right decision. So I know you see that all the time. Why do you think leaders struggle with that?
Yeah, so I think it's a process, right? So I don't think it's either or, but the model that I or the framework that I share in the book is heart, head, hands. And that is the way that humans actually experience the world. It's how we're actually wired. We're wired first to emotionally feel something, whether it's danger, in the back in the days of the saber-toothed tiger, whether it's the idea of kind of purpose and meaning and kind of understanding and belief. And then what the human brain does, it tries to make sense of that feeling. And that's when it opens up to intellectual kind of conversations and strategies and the business kind of, imperatives. And then it moves to this idea of, well, then what do I do with that? So that's the action piece. That's the hands. What's interesting is if you actually Google those three words in that order, what comes back 90% of the search results reorders heart, head, hands to head, heart, hands, because that's a more accepted framework. And it goes a little bit to what you were saying, which is the things that are easier to quantify, the things that are easier to present, the things that make you look like you're in charge and in control are strategy decks. They're numbers, they're spreadsheets, they're things that are facts. And they're wonderful and they're important, but it's not where you start. And the idea that you think that you lay out a strategy and people will emotionally connect to it is kind of ludicrous unless the person already believes in the direction you're going. So, it's interesting. Martin Luther King Jr., I love this. Simon Sinek uses this in his TED Talk, said, I have a dream, not I have a plan. And so when you think about engaging groups of people, one or 1,000 or a million, you've got to get them to first have emotional resonance with the idea and the journey you're about to take them on. And then you fill in those holes with things like strategies and plans. And then what do you need to do with that? And so when we talk about cultures of commitment, that is actually the driver, is people who believe. And also people have the chance to say, like, I hear what you're offering. I have no interest in that. And that's what you want. You want people to choose, right? Because you don't want compliance, which is I'll do what you're telling me to do, but I actually want to do something completely different because that's a whole different world. So I think people struggle with it because it's a harder, less tactical way of leading. So I would say you lead people, you manage process. And I think a lot of leaders default to management versus leadership because that is a little messier. But if you get it right, then people are with you on the journey and then they start to do things that you need to ask them to do.
Yeah, it leadership and running things is messy, and I think a lot of times we want to take the, I don't say shortcut, but maybe
Yeah.
shortcuts to just like, okay, we're just going to do this, and because as leaders, and leaders of all walks of life, doesn't matter if you're front lines to the CEO, there's a lot going on in our head. We're thinking about a variety of
Of
different
course.
things, and we're trying to play whack-a-mole to get them all addressed. And sometimes we go, "Oh, we'll just do this," and it's like we feel that sense of accomplishment. Oh, check that box, that's
Yes.
done.
Yes.
Is it done? Okay, it might be done for the moment. Is this going
Yeah.
to come back and bite you later on? And again,
Absolutely.
that's where you got to leverage both your heart and your head on that to kind of look and go, is this going to bite me later on? It's like, okay, maybe I should spend some time on this to prevent a big
Mhm.
blow up. But it does tie into, and we have this in the book as well. It's called the cadet framework,
Yeah.
and the letter C. And when I saw that, I said, okay, without the letter C, and
Mhm.
you'll share what that letter stands for. Without that, nothing else matters.
Correct.
It won't work. So why don't you share a little bit about the cadet framework and
Yeah.
particularly the first letter in that
I
framework?
yeah, I love the way that you framed that because that's so true. So essentially, very quickly, the cadet framework, which I hate, I have to say, like my disclaimer is I hate that it spells a word. We both know anytime something spells a word, it becomes a program, and programs become compliance driven. And I'm like, oh, it does. So I didn't build it to spell the word; it just ended up spelling a word. It's the distillation of a human relationship. And so when we're talking about building relationships with internal customers, but also external customers, building that relationship actually follows a trajectory. And so that's in work and that's also in life. And so the first, what C is connect. So the first thing you have to do, to your point, is you have to connect with people. And let's just take a retail example to show you what I don't mean by connect, which is the greeter at the front door when they say hi, hi, welcome, welcome. That is what people say is connecting, like greeting. That's not what I mean at all. Connection to me is curiosity, seeking to understand, wanting to form a bond, wanting to learn, wanting to ask questions so I understand what Michael's wants, needs, desires, likes, all those things are. Because the more I know about you, the more raw data I get about who you are, what's important to you, how you're motivated, all those things, then I can move to the next phase, which is assess, which is what is he asking for? What is he not asking for? So the stated needs, the unstated needs, and then what do I have to offer to be able to deliver to those on those things? That which brings the third step, which is deliver, which flawless execution of the stated needs, whatever those stated needs are. Once you've established credibility by doing that, you get to move into the next two phases, which are exceed and transform. And exceed means going above and beyond. That's when you start to go into more of the emotional unstated needs and you look for ways to, I didn't really ask you for that, but I did mention it. So there's a whole story in my book about the hungry boyfriend. So buy the book, read the book. The hungry boyfriend's a perfect distillation of this idea of exceed. And then transform means that in that experience, the way you have been engaged, the way you have actually built some version of relationship connection is transforming the way you feel about the person, about the experience, about the brand, and about other brands or other organizations that you engage with. And it's a cycle, which means that when you get to transform, guess what? You start again because now you have a deeper level of understanding and people are dynamic. So they're going to keep growing and changing and moving. So you have to do the same. And to your point, and I will say, even just like connection, I will give people this kind of framework and I'll be like, okay, so tell me where you can start. And to your point, everything has to start a connection and you can't leapfrog. You can't leapfrog past delivery to exceed. It's like when a flight is late and you're pissed off and then they offer you a free drink on the plane. The free drink on the plane is an attempt at exceeding, but no one actually delivered. So you're pissed and it's good money after bad, right? So you have to follow this journey because that's how humans actually build relationships.
That's a great example on the airplane. Not that we've ever been late
Oh,
for
never.
a flight,
And
yeah,
you feel bad for the flight attendants that have to actually offer you the drink
yeah.
coupon because they're not the ones who delayed the flight.
No, no, it's usually if it's mechanical or
Yeah,
a flight took off late, weather related. There's so many different, things
yeah,
that
whatever the
come up.
reasons are,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. If it's mechanical and everybody's like, oh, it's like, do you want to get on a broken plane? I'm
Right.
just asking.
Yeah.
I
But
certainly
the
don't.
reality is, regardless of what the reason was, they didn't deliver on the promise, which was on-time delivery. So people already are actually in a deficit. And so it's hard to come back from that if you haven't been able to deliver, right? So anyway,
No, it's a great analogy on this, and it's again, I highly encourage, and I'll definitely have a link in the show notes on where to pick up the book because it's obviously well done. And also, it makes you think. And I think in this 5 second soundbite world that we're in, if it's even 5 seconds anymore, take the time to look at this, because I think no matter where you are in an organization, it'll give you some insights and some tools and things to start talking to your heart a little bit
Yeah.
more. And I think if we all operated from our heart a little bit more, the engagement scores that we see would improve, productivity would improve. We would enjoy doing what we're doing because we see the value of it, and we see, how we're benefiting people by serving each other. I think it goes a long way. So,
Yeah.
love this conversation, Matt. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. So the book you can buy on Amazon's the easiest way to do it. So it's Built on Belief: Why Cultures of Commitment Are the Competitive Advantage. And you can reach me either on LinkedIn, Matt Marcotte, or at my website, which is matt at m2collaborative.com, or just the website itself, m2collaborative.com. So many different ways to get in touch with me if you want. And yeah, this year I'm actually starting off by doing a lot more keynote speeches and working with a lot more teams. So if you're interested, hit me up.
Yeah, definitely encourage people to do so. Your organizations will be better for it. So, Matt, thank you again for your time today. Really appreciate you. And thanks again for your time today. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you having me on. Have a wonderful day.